Google for Entrepreneurs is our umbrella effort of all of Google's programs and partnerships that support startups and entrepreneurs around the world. Today we have roughly 50 different efforts live in over 30 countries around the world. On the partnership front, we work with an amazing organization called Startup Weekend. They're a team that puts on these 54-hour weekend events. They hack throughout the weekend and launch companies on Sunday night. One of my favorite programs is called Jagriti Yatra, and it's a train ride across rural India with about 400 really energized youth and mentors. They discuss and they iterate and they get off really inspired and ready to go out there and implement that idea. Women Entrepreneurs on the Web is a program to get female entrepreneurs onto the web to help build and market and then scale their businesses.
It's a great place to get ideas, great place to network with women who are pursuing their passion.
We're really excited about a number of programs across the Middle East and North Africa. With our local office in Tel Aviv, we're seeing a lot of opportunities for technology and entrepreneurship, like hackathons with both Palestinian and Israeli youth, for example. Campus London is one of our most exciting initiatives.
It's a 7-story building filled with startups where startups can get workspace, access events, mentorship, all under one roof.
Having an environment like this, you have specialists in each field.
I would never have had the chance to meet people who are developers, who are designers. There isn't anywhere else where you can do this.
There's a huge opportunity to continue to make an impact, to scale this work, and we really want to empower the next generation of entrepreneurs and startups to be successful.
Welcome back to Google Developers Live. My name's Derek Slater, and I defend the open internet on Google's public policy team. Yesterday, we talked about measurement tools that can empower users to know more about what's happening online and how they can help defend and protect the free and open internet. Today, we want to talk more about the economic impact of the internet, and specifically entrepreneurship. We're joined here by two guests, John Lyman from Google for Entrepreneurs and Mike McGeary from Engine Advocacy. And we'll start by just having the two of them introduce themselves before we talk about the economic impact of the internet and some of the policies that affect it. John, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Derek, and thank you for having us on this show today. Really excited to talk about entrepreneurship. I work on the Google for Entrepreneurs team. I've been at Google for about 5 years. Before that was in Washington, D.C., so I've got a tech and policy background.
And John, why don't you tell us, what is Google for Entrepreneurs? What's the program about?
So Google for Entrepreneurs launched publicly in September of this year, and our mission is to empower entrepreneurs across the world through products, partnerships, and programs. We work with groups as diverse as Startup Weekend, which launches businesses and products in 54-hour weekend sessions across the world, and groups like Campus London, which is a 7-story building that Google owns and operates in East London. It's a tech hub where entrepreneurs and startups are working, and accelerators and others in the space are coming together to help them do their job. And it really grew out of a sense that executives had at Google that we were, as a company, having relationships with a lot of different incubators, accelerators, tech hubs globally. It was happening in a very grassroots way, which is a specialty of Google's, I would say. But they wanted to figure out, okay, what are we really getting out of these relationships? What makes sense? How can we help entrepreneurs the most? So they created a small team, which is now Google for Entrepreneurs, to really look across everything and figure out, okay, what's happening and how can we make sure that we're bringing Google's products and tools to bear in the way that makes the most sense. And we're doing it for a few reasons. As people know by now, Google itself started in a garage. And we think there are a lot of other people out there who are doing the same thing. We'd like to help them. Larry and Sergey, the founders of Google, believed that they had a lot of help along the way. Silicon Valley is a great place to start a business, but we wanted to help others who are outside of Silicon Valley do the same thing. And we believe we're a startup at heart. We think that we move quickly, and we're trying to infuse those values into others. We acquire a lot of companies here in Silicon Valley, but also globally, and we want to make sure that when people come here, they feel comfortable as entrepreneurs. More than 2/3 of entrepreneurs, founders that come from companies that Google has acquired actually still work here, which we view as a very, very good thing. And we found entrepreneurs all over the world who we're excited to work with. We estimate that there are more than 400 million entrepreneurs globally, and we think that 70 million of those are working in early stage ventures on new products and services, and we're trying to reach them in a variety of different ways and give them all the help that they need and tell them about Google.
Great, thanks, John. So, Mike, why don't you tell us about Engine Advocacy, sort of what it's about, where it came from, and what you're doing this year.
Well, thanks, Derek. It's great to be here today with all of you on Google Developers Live. I'm Michael McGarry. I'm the co-founder, political director, and senior strategist for Engine Advocacy. We are a nonprofit based in San Francisco here in the United States. And our goal is to affect better public policy by leveraging the voices and stories of the startup community and help educate both startups about government and government about startups. We got started last year, slightly before many here in the U.S. did, around the SOPA-PIPA fight and around some of the copyright fights that were happening in Congress. But that was actually slightly away from our core mission, which is really to act in a positive and forward-thinking way to find better policy alternatives where we can on a range of different issues. And the reason is very simple, and as John alluded to previously, entrepreneurs and the businesses built on the internet and in disruptive technology-focused startups really do power the economy in America and in many cases around the world as well. And what we want to do is make it a little easier for those businesses to take root and to get more of those stories to affect that policy and grow those businesses going forward. We have a whole range of issues that we work on, including things like high-scale immigration in the U.S., patent, spectrum, and broadband deployment. But one of the reasons that I'm here today, and I think it's vitally important that we're having this conversation, is that without a free and open internet, it doesn't matter what other issues we work on, because innovation in this country will be chilled in a way that we haven't seen, and in a way that would be totally detrimental to the internet and to the economy on the whole. So that is really a core issue for us. It's what brought us to the SOPA-PIPA copyright fight earlier this year and late last year, and it's what guides us in terms of how we think about the issues that we tackle and the issues that we want the startup community to lend their voices to in helping create better policy. So that's the background on us. We've been going now for a little over a year. We've got members all around the country who have done things as diverse as sign letters to Congress and meet regulators in our office in San Francisco, or take their story to Capitol Hill. And we're looking to do more of that in the coming Congress. And I think we'll probably talk a little bit about today some things we can expect there on a range of policy issues. But we're excited to be part of the ecosystem and help startups and government connect in a more meaningful and powerful way when it comes to public policy.
Thanks, Mike. And I think one of the interesting things about Engine that we've seen over the last year is more entrepreneurship being more of a sort of central focus in public policy, which in many ways isn't necessarily a natural fit for the tech community. What do you think is now shifting in terms of entrepreneurs getting more involved, or do you see that it's hard? Is there resistance to sort of getting involved?
I think that it's become a little bit more in vogue for entrepreneurs to be a part of this. SOPA was a real catalyst for that, but a lot of what we've done over the last year, and alongside people here at Google and other places all across the internet, has been really to try to turn that moment into a movement, and really to try and capitalize off a lot of the good stuff we did and a lot of the good feelings that came out of that, in order to continue that discussion and continue to get people from the startup community, the entrepreneurial community, more involved in their government. And on the flip side of that, in working with members of Congress and their staff, and with regulators and with people at the White House, and right on down to state and local governments as well, I'm finding more and more that there's a new currency in politics in a lot of ways, in that the stories that entrepreneurs and investors and people from this community can lend really carry a lot of weight, not just in terms of building better legislation, but in terms of better understanding and building better relationships between members of Congress, their staff, and an entrepreneur, so that a member or a staffer or a regulator has a better understanding of exactly how tech powers the economy, and how their influence really can be felt in terms of the debate. And beyond that, I think that understanding also has a backbone in some of the economic data that we're seeing. We're going to release a study tomorrow that says in no small part that entrepreneurship is really happening everywhere, just as John was saying, and I know you'll probably talk more about that. But entrepreneurship is taking root not just here in Silicon Valley and in New York, but in communities all across the country. That's something that speaks to 435 members of the House and 100 U.S. senators. That's something that everyone can take a hold of and say, this is happening in my community and I want to help that out. So that's the message that we're really working with the community to try to push, and it's been well received on both sides.
So John, you talked about sort of how entrepreneurship isn't just something for Silicon Valley or Silicon Alley or even the U.S., and you've worked with a bunch of communities around the world. On the public policy side, we certainly get asked by many different policymakers, how can I grow Silicon Valley where I am, whether that's in Idaho or in France or wherever. What's your take on that sort of question? Are there commonalities that you see of successful communities, and are there things that policymakers can do or shouldn't do in order to help grow the same sort of ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. We get this question a lot as well, and I think there's some things that people across the spectrum agree on are probably necessary, not always sufficient, for some sort of innovation hub to exist. It's usually proximity to a university, probably a research university, good infrastructure, so things like highways, fast broadband speed, so that people can actually get to where they need to get physically and electronically. A lot of times, it sounds a little bit weird, but some sort of counterculture that appears on the scene, usually before the hub itself. So if you look at places that are hotbeds of innovation in the U.S. and also globally, Silicon Valley, obviously, Boulder, Austin, Boston, New York, Seattle, these are places that usually have a little bit of counterculture. That's usually something that government can't help that much with, but they can get out of the way sometimes. So things like that. And then there are other factors that I think haven't been researched as much but are interesting. So non-compete agreements, for example, are not particularly enforceable in California, meaning that when people go to a company and sign an agreement that prevents them from leaving and taking information with them freely and openly, those are less enforceable in California than in other parts, which means that when people leave jobs, they take some knowledge with them about how things worked at other companies, and that helps with the free flow of information. I think what's really interesting is that in many ways this is the internet itself, right? The internet started at research universities, and it had a lot of free information flowing between different people. It was countercultural. Infrastructure was very important. So I think those are all things that can be done to help create these hubs globally. One point I wanted to follow up on that Michael made, which I think is really important, is entrepreneurs getting more involved in policy. So SOPA PIPA was a great example of people actually really coming together and making change. And I think that was important. I think entrepreneurs like to be able to see that they can have an impact. SOPA PIPA, great example. Here in San Francisco, some of the work that Twitter and Ron Conway did, there was a victory there, right? Twitter was going to leave San Francisco. Now they are not going to leave because of a policy change. Another example yesterday out of Washington, D.C. that I thought was really interesting was Uber. Worked through the system and are now going to be allowed to operate their car ride service without interference, but they were able to get a policy win through a grassroots movement, essentially, of users who said, this is a really important service to us, and we want to contact our policymakers and make sure that innovation is allowed to spread.
And if I could just launch off of that for a second, I think you're absolutely right, John, in that point. And we actually wrote something on our site this morning by our policy analyst Ed Goodman on this, which is that we can disagree on things, but that does not mean we should disengage as a startup community, as entrepreneurs. In fact, it means we should engage even further in a lot of ways, because as we saw, especially with the Uber example, is when the company went and worked to make a policy alternative a reality, it worked out. Now, it's not going to be every case. We're not always going to win like we did on Prop E or like on SOPA PIPA. Prop E is the San Francisco initiative on the ballot last November. And some of these victories that we're going to have are going to be much longer slogs than a blackout on January 18th and a bill getting pulled on January 20th. That was light speed in Congress, as was Jobs Act, as was so many of the great victories we've had over the last year here in the U.S. But it's important to stay engaged in that fight. It's important for entrepreneurs to be a part of that because, as we've seen, when they lend their particular viewpoint and angle to that story, it really does change the debate in very meaningful ways.
Let's talk about one part of the Jobs Act for a second, particularly on crowdfunding. That's been a big issue over the last year, and it's sort of similar to what's been happening with Uber and Airbnb, where we have these network-based businesses, these communities being formed, where the law is sometimes a little bit out of step. What happened with the Jobs Act and its crowdfunding, and where does that stand now? Are there things, Mike, that developers, entrepreneurs who are watching this can do in order to help move that along?
Well, I think that Jobs Act, again, went through Congress in a very partisan year during a very partisan election and did so in about 6 weeks, if you look at the calendar from when the majority leader in the House, Eric Cantor, and some of his colleagues first proposed the bill to when the president signed it in the Rose Garden. It was all of about 6 weeks. And again, that really is light speed in the United States Congress and for getting things done in Washington. However, that bill is not yet law. There are still regulations that have to be put forth by the Securities and Exchange Commission on crowdfunding, on a few other pieces of that bill in order for it to become a reality and for what a lot of people from the entrepreneurial community would like to see in terms of crowdfunding become part of the law and become something where people can see real and direct benefit off of it. That process is still ongoing. There are still ways to, as an entrepreneur or as a developer, as someone who works at a startup that could benefit from crowdfunding, there are still ways to be part of that debate, and you can log a comment with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and that's something that is ongoing, especially on the crowdfunding piece. We hope that the SEC will promulgate those rules, early in the new year and really start working towards a solution so that we can finally see that become a reality. But it's not there yet, despite how much work this community's already put in. There's still a little bit more to do. But when we get there, if we're able to, again, lend our collective voice to this debate and help shape the law in a way that will work best for us, I think that'll be the most positive outcome overall for entrepreneurs.
And I think that's interesting that you bring that up, because I think not only can people engage to shape what happens, but I think they can also engage and hopefully speed it up a bit. We're hearing from entrepreneurs that it's taken them a bit longer than they thought to actually get regulations put around crowdfunding. I think it's going to be important for entrepreneurs. And these are not, again, entrepreneurs in New York and Silicon Valley who oftentimes have access to financial resources and venture capital that others don't. But these are the entrepreneurs in Omaha who are trying to do an angel round with friends and family and want a platform to be able to do that a little bit more easily than they have right now. So I'm really interested to see where this goes and hope that it happens quickly.
John, one of the things you talked about was culture, and another key issue that's certainly been coming up over the last month and looks like will be on the front burner in 2013 is immigration. For both of you, what sort of is the both outlook within the entrepreneurs community? What do you hear about in terms of immigration visa issues? Is this sort of a front burner issue for entrepreneurs these days in the Valley? And what are the sort of hopes and desires for what entrepreneurs want out of immigration reform here in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think it's a huge issue. I hear about it quite a bit, more so I think in some ways than almost any other policy issue. So one quick example, I have a friend who's a recruiter in the Valley, and as a lot of developers know, recruiters are the lifeblood in some ways of the Valley because they're effectively and efficiently taking talent from one place and deploying it in another. So they see a lot of resumes, they talk to a lot of people, and they understand this issue firsthand. This friend went to SoundCloud for a year, which is one of the most successful startups based in Germany. It's in Berlin. And when she recruited there, she recruited globally. She had two requirements, essentially, that she had to meet. She had to meet the technical requirements for the engineering position, so the coding languages, and then usually people had to speak English. And that was it. And she had engineers from India and Eastern Europe and Russia and Africa and all over, Americans. She moved back about 8 months ago, and she's at Square. which is one of the most successful American startups around right now. Immediately, she stopped recruiting globally. She just doesn't want to mess with it. She can't get visas. It slows her down, and so she only recruits in the U.S. Now, there's a lot of talent in the U.S., but there's obviously more talent globally, and Michael can speak to these numbers. But I think what ends up happening is when these jobs at Square, when they're filled, and when they're filled with good talent, that helps Square, which is an American company, but it also helps innovation in general, and it helps the local ecosystem as other jobs are created when those jobs are filled with the right people. So yeah, incredibly important issue, and one that I hope the Congress addresses.
Right, I can't agree with that enough. I mean, I think that we're looking at a situation, not just here in Silicon Valley and in New York, but we're looking at entrepreneurial communities throughout the country that are suffering right now. And to say that immigration is a top line issue, it may be the only issue in a lot of cases. As you said, John, and I can't speak to the numbers as we'll have in the report tomorrow, but with each job that's created at a technology firm, whether it's here in Mountain View or at San Francisco, New York, wherever, we can look and create an average of 4.3 jobs in the non-tradable sector. So let's dig down from the economics textbook here. What's a non-tradable sector? It's everything from barbers to plumbers to doctors and lawyers and, yes, even bankers and all of the things that make a community run, restaurants, you name it. These are the kind of jobs that are created when a technology company moves in or when a startup is created. And we're also looking at a situation where these startups can't fill their talent gap fast enough. They can't get more people out of the universities and into jobs fast enough to develop the products that are really changing the economy. And Derek talked a little bit about some of the peer economy, things like Etsy and Airbnb and Square and others that are powering other businesses as well. The faster that those businesses and others like them get created and more businesses are created on top of them, the better off we're going to be. They can't do that without talent. So this is why immigration and also education, investment in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics is vital to the long-term health and success of the American economy. And if we don't fix immigration in the near term and we don't invest in education in the long term, we are going to be met with a gap between the vacancies that we have and the jobs that we could create and the jobs that just won't be there, and the talent that's not there to fill them, I should say. So we can talk about the individual stories as well of entrepreneurs. I mean, we know many of them, in my line of work. So I have a day job too. I'm a strategist in the operations group at Hattery, which is a venture capital firm in San Francisco. And we see entrepreneurs every day and work alongside, some of them that are immigrant founders and entrepreneurs that are, while they're building their product and building a business to compete and doing it in the United States, still trying to figure out their own visa status and whether or not they're going to be able to stay here or whether they have to go to their home country or frankly to another country around the world where the help wanted sign for entrepreneurs is out. Places like Startup Chile or South Korea or Canada or any of a number of countries around the world where they've taken steps to fix their immigration problems, and we're losing the advantage in the United States that we've had for a very long time on that. So yes, it's a top-line issue. It is the top-line issue, and I think it's one that in the new Congress we hope to see a lot of movement on very soon.
So let's take we got a couple of questions here from folks watching. Aaron in Atlanta brings up a good question, which is basically if you wanted to do a startup that was about protecting the free and open internet, are there ways you can go the social entrepreneurship route, or are there ways to pursue funding for projects that are about building tools that help the internet? I guess another way of looking at it is, we've talked about entrepreneurs getting engaged in Washington. Are there things they can do as entrepreneurs, sorts of companies or technologies they could be building that would help advance this cause?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are, and I think that there are ways that they can go out and get funding through those. Kickstarter and Indiegogo are two platforms. We worked a lot with Indiegogo. We launched a partnership with them in Germany that allowed entrepreneurs to go out and fundraise for their ideas and get money, I think, a little bit more easily than they would have otherwise. But are there specific for-profit businesses that help keep the internet open and alive? Yeah, I think there absolutely are. I think that anytime you create a company that shows people that innovation helps create jobs and make the economy better and stronger, I think you're contributing to that. So I mentioned Kickstarter before, but as a platform, but I also mentioned them as a company that you could start. This is something that didn't exist or wasn't even possible 5 years ago, the idea of being able to go online and get funding for an art project or a piece of hardware that you wanted to make. I think legislators notice that. I think legislators notice Uber, and they realize that, hey, yeah, these are companies that are going to be the future, and we understand that we need to help them evolve, even though there are a lot of vested interests that don't want them around. I think people are starting to recognize, yeah, this is a net job creator, and we need to make sure that they're allowed to succeed.
Yeah, I think the access to capital part is key in that, we look at the free and open internet, and the one thing that always springs to my mind is the internet is the greatest force for democratization of ideas really in the history of the world. And now when we add better access to capital to that and more benefit to social entrepreneurship, I think that there's a lot of ideas that can take flight. One of the things is, as we built Engine over the course of the last year or so, has been whether or not we want to build tools in-house or whether we want to work with other startups and leverage the tools that they've built. And we've had a combination of that, but there are a lot of great tools out there from whether it's PopVox or some of the things that are happening over at Center for Rights and Fight for the Future and groups like that, in the digital innovation and activism space as well. There are lots of places that we can plug in and work together and help to promote each other and help to promote these tools that are being built. So I think that there's a lot of good happening in terms of social enterprise in that way. And I think that the more that there's access to capital to make those products a reality, the more that we'll be able to use them and other groups like us. And that can only be a good thing as we continue to build our sites and our products moving forward.
And Mike, Mark in Palo Alto wants to know, along with access to capital and immigration, what are the other issues you're going to be working on in the next year? And also, are there ways that, this is a developer audience, can they get involved with Engine in some way? Is there some way that they can join, or how does that work? How does membership work?
Well, Mark from Palo Alto, first, I'd like to take you out for a beer, and thank you for that question. The second thing is that, yes, you can join us at engine.is online. Or engineadvocacy.org. We've got a site up there that's we're putting a lot of great content on every day, talking about the issues that matter to the community. We're going to keep our focus on those issues, keep writing and researching about them, whether it's the economic impact of startups overall and the tech community. Some of the other issues we're working on besides immigration, like I said, we're working on better investment in STEM education in the long term. Things like access to quality spectrum and broadband, trying to bring things like Google Fiber to places beyond Kansas City or other projects like that in order to make better access to better, faster internet possible for more people. We're also working on patent issues, and this is one that I think we might see a lot of movement on in the new Congress as well. Of course, Congress just went through a multi-year process to pass the America Invents Act. We think that there's a lot more that Congress can do, that regulatory agencies can do as well in terms of how that goes into force and how we think about patents in the software space and with internet businesses in general. And I think that there's some room there for a lot of advocacy from the developer community and from engineers who may themselves have gone out and gotten patents or work in companies where that's a priority as well, and trying to look at different legislative alternatives to solve some of the morass around non-practicing entities and other problems having to do with the patent community. So there's a lot that you can find out about on engine.is. I encourage you to go there and sign up.
Great. Well, that brings us to the end of today's show. Thanks again for joining us tomorrow. We'll be back to talk up with civil society groups from around the world on the ITU and internet freedom. We'll talk to you then. Thanks.